I'm Giles, and you'll meet my wife, Allison, a little bit later. Brandon is right here, and then Matt is right here. So we're sort of the team at Wayfinders, so we're happy to invite you to Groundwork. And so what's Groundwork about? So I'll quickly tell you that it's really about equipping everyday disciples and everyday leaders to be on mission in the everyday. So this is the kind of things that we'll be doing here, is like really helping you learn some new things about how can I take my ministry where God has called and put me, and how can I go into places where I work, where I live, in my interactions, and how can I serve and be on mission in the everyday. So today we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, and it's really good about like, are we self-aware? Do we understand what emotional intelligence is? And Allison's really going to sort of walk us through that. But we have sort of, I just want to quickly say that there's a couple things we're going to be doing. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is an assessment. So you'll get an idea of sort of where you're at. Then Allison's going to teach us sort of going more in depth of what that assessment is about and sort of going through those practices. Then we're going to spend about 30 minutes. We're going to break you guys up into smaller groups, and you're going to sort of just discuss some things. We have some questions for you to discuss with each other, sort of about what you thought of the assessment, but then also just some other questions about emotional intelligence for you to go over. Then we'll get back together and we'll just have some individuals share like what they sort of highlights from their conversations. And then Brandon will wrap up after that. But we're excited to get started. So I'm going to leave right now and get Allison on. We also have visitors. We have some people Google meeting in from Kenya. So it's 3 a.m. there, but they are joining us for this training as well. So we wanted to share that. But I'm going to hand it over to Allison, and she's going to get us started.
Hello, everyone. I think you all know me. Habari zenu to our Kenyan friends. Karibuni sana. We're going to go ahead and get started. So as Giles said, we're going to be talking tonight about emotional intelligence. What is it? Why should it matter to us? And how can we grow in that? We're going to give you just some practical ways we can grow. So let's start first with the assessment. So why are we doing this? Everyone loves taking a test, right? Yes. Fun first thing that we're going to do. Like Giles said, it just gives you a gauge of where you're at. So kind of a benchmark as we go into this discussion, you can kind of be thinking about what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and as we talk about areas or practical ways to grow, maybe you can kind of focus on those areas, right, where you need to grow. So we're going to give you 10 minutes to complete this. It's not very long, but for the sake of time, but also we don't want you to overthink it. I'm one of those people that overthinks these kind of tests, but really just respond honestly. So not, aspirationally of like, I want to be this way. Respond honestly to how you are and don't overthink it. Just kind of your first reaction to the question. So go ahead, 10 minutes, and then we'll call it and we'll just go on with the presentation. Okay, so what is emotional intelligence? Well, a pretty simple definition is it's my capacity to recognize and manage my own feelings and to recognize and respond effectively to the feelings of others. I'm just going to say right now, I'm not a licensed therapist, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but this is a topic that I have studied quite a bit over the last 10 years in ministry, both for my own personal growth as I submit myself to the Lord, right, and learn to take everything under His Lordship and grow in Him, but it's also to be able to disciple others effectively. So I know I see faces in the room that have been through Kaleo disciple training or are going through right now. And so as a disciple trainer, right, there's a huge vulnerability component to that where we're sharing of ourselves with others. We're sharing where we're growing in the Lord, where we're struggling. We're hearing that from other people as well. So there's a counseling component to discipleship as well. So it's important to recognize these areas and to grow in them, to be a good disciple, to be a good disciple maker, even as a leader in your community. The good news is that if you all are feeling maybe really good or maybe really kind of bad in some areas of this test that you took, that emotional quotient or EQ can be learned and we can grow in it. So unlike our IQ, which is sort of set, right? We can actually grow in our emotional intelligence. So that's the good news. So there's 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence, and they relate to a personal quadrant or a personal track and a social track, and also recognition and regulation or management. So the self quadrants are self-awareness and self-management, and then the social or social awareness and relationship management. So we're going to be talking about each one of these quadrants. Now I know we could spend hours, right, on each of these topics. So this is just kind of a survey course just for your awareness. We can send some resources as well after this meeting, but we're just going to kind of fly through it because we want you guys to be able to discuss as well. So that first quadrant of the personal side is self-awareness. And this is really how I feel and why I feel that way. So it's recognizing and understanding my moods, emotions, and drives and how they affect my thoughts and behaviors. So as I'm saying this, so it's feeling your feelings is kind of a short way to say it. As I'm saying this, I see some people looking a little uncomfortable, and maybe others are like, yes, like I'm all in, like I'm used to expressing my emotions. So there's kind of those two sides, either expressive or you repress your emotions or stuff them. And a lot of that's learned behavior. It's how we were taught growing up. You know, like I'll say for myself, I tend to be on the stuffer side of things because that's what I was taught growing up. That emotions were something that you got over quickly, like you dealt with. Maybe if you grew up in a Christian household, it might be some emotions are almost like sinful, right? Or we shouldn't have these negative emotions of anger or sadness, like it's something we need to get over quickly. On the other side of expressive, maybe you grew up in a household where everyone said everything that they felt all the time, and so it might have been kind of chaotic, right? There might have been some conflict because of that. So we don't really want either extreme. We don't want to live in that camp where we're ruled by our emotions, but we don't want to ignore them either. So emotions do play a factor in our decisions and how we relate to other people. So a couple of things to think about. Am I expressive or am I a stuffer? Do I pay attention to my emotions? Do they flow easily? At any given moment, am I able to identify what I'm feeling? So even if there's a complex emotion, like am I able to kind of unpack that and identify it? Can I identify where my emotions show up in my body? So an example for me, when I was a kid, I was really shy, painfully shy and introverted. And so I had a lot of anxiety surrounding that. And how that would show up in my body is my stomach. Like I would often complain to my mom, that my stomach hurts and I wouldn't want to go to school because I'd feel sick because my stomach would hurt. And I was too young to understand really that was anxiety, but that can be a cue in your body, or if you're carrying stress, maybe in your neck or your shoulders, that can be a cue to you of how you're feeling. And so to stop and say, like, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way, right? The other part of self-awareness is recognizing how I come across to others. I know this is like maybe a little difficult thing, right, to admit, but if I'm self-aware, I understand how I come across to others. So, maybe you can relate to someone in your life that when you know them in a deeper way, they're kind and they're loving and they're compassionate, but to others, they come across as, super reserved or maybe the other way, really like brash and almost too assertive to the point of being aggressive. So it's important to know how we come across to others. One tool that we can send around after the presentation, if you struggle with identifying your emotions, and I'll just say I'm one of those. When I took this assessment, that was a growth area for me, was self-awareness. And so if you struggle with that, there's something called the feelings wheel. And I use it. I've provided it to people as a resource. And it's essentially takes kind of those core emotions of mad, sad, glad, and and goes deeper. So if I am sad? Is it really that I'm irritated? Is it really that I'm frustrated? So it allows you to kind of put language and words to what you're feeling. So the next kind of personal aspect of emotional intelligence is self-management. We could also call this self-regulation, or the Bible calls it self-control, right? So it's controlling or redirecting impulsive feelings and behaviors, thinking before I act, managing my emotions in healthy ways. So, I mentioned like anger or sadness. So looking at those emotions not as negative, but as really neutral. Like those emotions are a cue to me. If I'm feeling angry, why am I feeling angry? So to be able to process and interview that emotion instead of like exploding right onto someone else. A lot of times where this lack of self-management comes up is when you're overly stressed, right? If I'm under a really stressful situation, a stressful stimulus, that compromises clear thought, and it can also affect then my actions, right? There's actually a scientific reason for this, and I have a doctor in the room, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the amygdala is a tiny but powerful part of your brain, and it's where we process emotions. So when a stimulus comes in, it goes through the amygdala first. We actually react to something emotionally first before we can rationally react. So an example of this for me is there is someone in my life, I'm not going to say who they are, no one in this room, but I wouldn't use that example, no. But this person is a family member and is a hypercritical person. And talking about self-awareness, she is not aware that she is that way. We had a conversation once, someone actually, a coworker said this to her, and she was almost like, "Can you believe they called me a critical person?" And I'm like, yes, I can, but I didn't say that. But well, maybe I did at one point. But anyway, when I was less healthy, right? So yeah, so for me, when this person says a critical, hypercritical comment, not constructive criticism, just like mean sometimes, like that's triggering for me, right? So immediately it goes to my amygdala, right? And I just want to lash out, or I want to like be critical back, or I want to say something harsh or mean. But instead of that, and it shuts down. The reason it's a hijack is because you just focus on the emotion. You can't move from that. So you might think about like an argument you have with a friend, or maybe in your spouse, that you had a conflict and they said something to you that upset you. You tend to like fixate on that negative remark, and then you miss everything else that they're saying, right? So this part of self-management is being able to regulate that emotion and process it in a healthy way so that I can be present and listen to the other person. So it's bringing your mind back to clarity, and then I can make a good decision, right? So social awareness this is now we're looking at sort of the social outward facing part. It's understanding the emotions, needs, and concerns of other people. So this is where we say like being able to read a person or like read a situation. So it could be one-on-one, it could be in a group context. I'm kind of able to read the room. A huge skill within social awareness, and keep in mind, we can learn these things, right? Is empathy. And so I thought I would clarify, I think sometimes we can misuse or interchange those terms empathy and sympathy, but they're actually very different things. So empathy is feeling with a person. It's sensing someone else's thoughts and feelings in order to see their perspective. It's taking in other people's feelings into thoughtful consideration so I can respond appropriately to those feelings. So I've heard it said it's like the difference in empathy and sympathy. I think Brene Brown said this is like empathy is like you're in the hole with the person, right? So if someone is feeling overwhelmed or stressed or depressed, instead of standing at the top and looking down like, oh, sorry, you're feeling that way, have a sandwich, like you're going down in the hole with them and you're saying, I've been there, and you're listening to them, right? And where they're at. So you're not putting your feelings in it, even if you would feel differently in that situation. You're really trying to understand how they're feeling. And then she also said, which I thought was interesting because I've caught myself doing this, at least statements are hardly ever, never empathetic. So if someone's sharing something really difficult with you, like let's say they're going through a marital conflict and you say, well, at least you have a husband, at least you're married, or like your child is flunking out of school and someone says, well, at least your other kid, whatever, your daughter is like making straight A's. That's not being empathetic, right? So we want to sit with them in that moment of how they're feeling, because perception is reality, to them. So this being able to practice empathy requires my presence in the moment. So if and we'll talk about active listening in a little bit, but if I am thinking about, someone sharing something painful with me, or maybe even happy, but I'm, somewhere else, like I'm distracted, I'm thinking of, what I have to do next. Perhaps I'm thinking about like what I'm going to say next, or like how I can fix that, or how I can offer advice. That is not being empathetic, because I'm supposed to be just sitting with them right in the moment. Usually in my experience, my own experience, when I've gone through something painful and I'm sharing with someone, I don't really want them to fix it, because words are not gonna, right? No response is gonna fix a difficult situation. So it's really just, I'm together with you, and connection is really the basis for empathy. So it's also a give and take in the moment. So, it's not just you listening to that person, which you are, but you're also paying attention to yourself. So self-awareness comes into that too. In the moment, again, I'm not thinking about myself, I'm not processing it in that moment, but later I'm thinking, if someone said something that made me feel really uncomfortable, why did that make me feel uncomfortable or angry? Like, why did I react that way when I heard someone saying whatever they said, right? So later I'm interviewing that. So it still goes back to self-awareness, even in that moment, because that's part of building good relationships. So you can go on to the next. It dovetails with this relationship management. This is really pulling together all three of the quadrants that we just talked about. So if we grow in all three, the self-awareness, the self-management, social awareness, if we grow in those areas, then this will flow more naturally for us. So this is really taking my own emotions and the emotions of other people, plus the context, in order to manage social situations in a healthy, I would say healthy way. So an example of this, again, is kind of what I talked about with relational, intentional discipleship. We're kind of using all of those skills of self-awareness, self-management, social skills, reading the cues of other people, in order to effectively disciple in an intentional way. And the good outcome, it sounds like manipulation, but it's not. It's in a sense of like moving toward the good, that, we have try to take self-interest out of it. We have a good that we want to accomplish, whether it's working well in a team, managing a conflict. So if we can employ all of those skills to move toward a good outcome, right? That's what the management part of relationship is. So I've heard it said that when we talk about conflict, that 10% of conflict is due to a difference in opinion, but 90% is due to the delivery and tone of voice. So if you think about anything you disagree on with someone, right? If I'm getting worked up against self-management, if I'm coming across like I'm yelling at you, or my voice is going up, and I'm not very loud, but like my voice is going up and I'm like getting in your face, maybe even like that nonverbal cue of like I'm just coming right up to you, then that causes more stress, right? But if I am thoughtful and I'm using a calmer tone of voice, then that's going to make a difference even in the conflict resolution. So why does all this matter? Some people may be thinking like, I'm not in tune with my emotions. Isn't this just like, psychobabble, like some counselor speak? Like, why do I need to care about this? Well, that first bullet point, first off, it's a matter of obedience as disciples of Jesus, because the word tells us love God with all your heart, which is your emotional center, right? Soul, mind, strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. So I have to understand what's in my own heart in order to do these things, right? So everything we just learned, you can see how that fits in with loving God and loving neighbors. So I have to know what's in my heart and whether my heart is honoring and loving God, whether I'm loving myself, and whether I'm loving others in a healthy way. And I would argue this is how we're set apart as believers, right? A lot of the things that we've talked about. So in a self-focused world, in a world where maybe people are about their own agenda, right? To be a listener, to actively listen to someone, to display empathy is what we're called to do as Christ followers. The word says we rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. So we actually enter into those emotions with other people. But we got to understand ourselves first, because especially those difficult emotions. I know in my own life, again, I told you I'm learning, I'm growing in self-awareness. Those hard emotions like anger and sadness and just strong emotions, I would say, if I can't recognize that in myself, then how can I come alongside someone else? I'm going to feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to be able to empathize in a healthy way, because again, if I'm wanting to stuff it in myself, then I want to dismiss it in someone else. It's bringing all that I am under the lordship of Christ. So again, I have to know myself, right? And know what I'm feeling in order to bring those emotions under the lordship, because I don't want to be ruled by my emotions. I want to allow Jesus access to those areas of my life. And we kind of talked about the others of physical and mental health as well. So how can we improve our EQ? This is the good news, right? We can grow in this. The first one, I know, again, makes some people feel uncomfortable, but it's feeling my feelings in the moment. So this is kind of the analytical part, right? We're suspending judgment. So again, this is where I struggle sometimes with self-awareness. It's like, well, I know I shouldn't be angry about that, or I know I shouldn't be upset, but I just let yourself feel that. Like, it's okay. Like, I'm upset. Why am I upset? And analyzing that. We talked about some of these other points, but I think the one I wanted to hit was being present with God in order to be present with others. So it's that access issue, right? If I'm withholding something from God in my time with Him, if I can't be my authentic self, if I'm over spiritualizing, let's say, I keep going back to anger because that's what's, I guess, coming up, I'm thinking about in the Christian context. But if I can't sit with that anger with God, then how can I be present with someone else in their moment of feeling that strong emotion? So I think that's a really important point. And then active listening, that's a whole training in and of itself that we could do at some point. But essentially, active listening is reflecting back what someone has said, asking clarifying statements. So it's gaining understanding is the point. Again, it's about connection. So I'm not trying to offer my experience necessarily or my opinion. It's just really trying to get to the heart behind what they're saying. Like, what are they feeling and experiencing? So that's an important part of empathy, is active listening. This point about asking a trusted friend. We all want to do this right now. As we get in our groups, we're going to be doing, no, we're not. But someone that's going to speak the truth in love to you. How do I come across to other people? And that includes my nonverbal cues. And we all have nonverbal messages that we send. And, again, it's something we've learned, and we just do over and over again, we don't think about, it's unconscious. But asking someone to kind of point that out, maybe it's, I don't make eye contact when I talk with you, maybe it's because I'm shy and I'm nervous, or, but how does that make the other person feel? Are you actually listening to them? Because, nodding and making eye contact is one way you communicate that you're listening. So Henry Cloud, I don't know if you all know him, but he's a Christian clinical psychologist, and he comes at it from a biblical worldview. And I was preparing for this presentation, and he posted something on social recently that he said 2 questions you can ask your trusted friend or your spouse. Giles and I did this. One is, what about me draws you to me? Okay, it's a good question. Second question, a little bit harder. What about me pushes you away from me? So that's kind of hard to hear, right? Like if we really want to be serious about how we come across to someone, I mean, those are good questions, but hard to receive. So Giles and I did it, and we've been married, almost 23 years. And I was like, I bet I know what you're going to say about me. And it was pretty close. It was pretty close. And vice versa. It was kind of the same of what I said about him in both of those categories. So you might think about doing that. Again, has to be with someone you trust, and you have to be willing to receive it, I guess, is the other piece of it. So and then the final point, and then I don't want to keep talking because I want you guys to be able to discuss, but this last one about conflict, I think hits a lot of, it hits me because I have realized about myself, my personality type is I love harmony in my internal world and my external world. But I've learned that that's not really being a peacemaker as Jesus instructs us to be a peacemaker. It's really being a peacekeeper. So we can actually learn to see conflict as an opportunity to grow in relationship, even though it may be uncomfortable to me. I'm speaking for me. But it's, again, that what we talked about, tone of voice, like all those things, like how empathy, how we can enter into the other person's perspective and see it from their perspective can help us actually draw closer together, even in the midst of disagreement or conflict.
Let's just show Allison some love for setting the table very, very well for us. And, we don't want this to just be a time where it's like, hey, here's some good content. We want there to actually be practical application and some things, and with other like-minded people, some dots that are going to start to connect. Some things that somebody says, even here, I'm like, wait, what? Seth, say that again. Matt, say that again. Josh, say that again. There's so many different things in that. We are always creating environments. We have resources, frameworks that we are trying to use to serve people. We've been doing this for a while now. So I'm not going to go in too much detail. There's more events. Most of you can scan the QR code. And we'll work on that for the future because we want everybody to be able to scan the QR code. But we have personal impact statement workshop downtown at the estuary. Does anybody know what the estuary is? It used to be this old art gallery. It's a historic part of the city. And a friend of ours bought it, and it's a multi-use facility that has residential space, but also they're trying to create some faith community stuff there for Jesus. And they're we want one of our first things that we offer to the public to be this Wayfinders workshop. So if you've ever thought about, God's purpose for my life, that feels like a heavy statement, right? Where it's love God, love others, make disciples. Very broad. But in this unique moment, in this cultural moment, and with your experiences, what are the ways that he wants you to express that? There's a great workshop that we're going to do. It's fun, it's enjoyable, it's interactive, but it's also very impactful for people. We'd love for you to join that. Life mapping workshop. If you want to go deeper on purpose, if you want to go consider career change or staying in your career, or just we talked about pouring into yourself for personal development, leadership development, we've been able to serve somewhere around 4,000 people in the last 4 years with this workshop, from CEOs to 7th graders and everybody in between. And so we'd love for you to consider joining that. And then we have a Start Something workshop. I know last time we talked a little bit about mission last month. Some of you were here, some weren't. about launching something new, about launching a new missional idea. This might be a true nonprofit. This might be just this grassroots thing that you start, okay? Would love for you to join us in that. And then the next Groundwork is going to be Tuesday, October 24th at 6:30 p.m. right here. So invite some friends. This is not like a members only club, right? Like you don't have to pay your dues or swipe a card or anything like that. And what's great is there's a lot of new faces here. There's some familiar faces. There's some people who are like, we're out of town, this, that, and the other. So it'll be fun just seeing the wide age range, various gender, all that. Great. And if you have more questions, myself, Matt, Giles, Allison can answer those questions. We can help you go a little bit deeper. We can follow up on an email, call, whatever, but we'll hang out for a little bit too.